My wife started waking up at 3 in the morning about 4 months ago, and I didn't say anything about it for weeks. The first time it happened, I reached over to her side of the bed and she wasn't there. I lay still for a moment, listening to the house, and then I heard the soft sound of a door closing somewhere down the hall. I told myself she had probably just gone to get a glass of water. I fell back asleep within minutes and didn't think about it again until the next time it happened. And then it happened again. And again after that. By the third week I had a pattern. Somewhere between 2:30 and 3 in the morning, she would slip out of bed so quietly that I barely felt the mattress shift, and she would be gone for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. When she came back she would slide under the covers carefully, like she was trying not to wake me, and within minutes her breathing would slow and she'd be asleep. I pretended to be asleep every single time. I don't know exactly why I didn't just ask her. We had been married for 9 years, and we were the kind of couple that talked about everything, or at least I thought we were. But something about the way she moved in the dark, so deliberate and so careful, made me feel like whatever was happening at 3 in the morning belonged to her in a way I didn't want to interrupt. So I watched, and I waited, and I said nothing. During the day she was completely herself. She made coffee in the morning, she laughed at my terrible jokes, she called her mother on Sundays and talked for too long the way she always did. She didn't seem tired, didn't seem distant, didn't seem like a woman carrying something heavy. She seemed completely fine, and that somehow made the whole thing more confusing rather than less. I started paying attention to small things. The way she sometimes paused in the middle of a conversation and looked at something I couldn't see. The way she washed her hands twice every morning, more thoroughly than usual. And I noticed once, just once, a faint trace of something blue under her fingernail that she hadn't quite managed to scrub away. I didn't say anything about that either. I told myself 100 different stories about what she could be doing. None of them felt right, and most of them felt unfair to her, and I hated myself a little for the direction my mind went in the middle of the night when she was gone and the room was too quiet. But I knew my wife. I knew her the way you know someone after 9 years of sharing a life with them, not perfectly, not completely, but deeply enough to recognize when something feels wrong versus when something feels private. And this felt private. Whatever she was doing at 3 in the morning, it didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a secret. And there is a difference, even if it took me a while to trust that feeling. So one night, about 6 weeks into this, I decided to find out. I waited until I heard the door click shut down the hall. I gave it 5 minutes, lying there in the dark, counting my own heartbeat. And then I got up and walked down the hallway in my socks. I stopped outside the door of the small room at the end of the hall, the room we called the spare room, the room that had a desk and some boxes and a window that faced the garden, the room that nobody really used for anything. The light was on inside. I could see it under the door, warm and yellow and steady. I stood there for a long moment with my hand raised, almost knocking, and then I changed my mind. I reached for the handle instead, as quietly as I could, and I opened the door just enough to see inside. And what I saw stopped me completely. She was sitting on the floor. Not at the desk, not in a chair, on the floor, cross-legged, with a large canvas propped up against the wall in front of her and a wooden board across her knees covered in small tubes of paint and brushes of different sizes. The lamp from the desk had been pulled down to floor level and angled toward the canvas, and in that warm circle of light my wife was painting with a focus and a stillness that I had never seen on her face before. Not in 9 years. I stood in the doorway and looked at the room properly for the first time. There were canvases everywhere. Leaning against the walls, stacked carefully in the corner, some finished and some half done, some that looked like they had been worked on for weeks. Landscapes, mostly, fields and skies and the kind of light that happens just before sunset when everything goes gold and quiet. But also faces. Small studies of faces, painted with a softness that made them look like memories rather than portraits. I had no idea. I had lived with this woman for 9 years, slept in the same bed, eaten at the same table, shared every ordinary Tuesday and every difficult conversation, and I had no idea that she could do this. That she had been doing this. That somewhere inside the person I thought I knew completely, there was an artist who had been painting in secret in our spare room while I slept. I stood there for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a minute or two. She never turned around, completely absorbed in what she was doing, her brush moving in small careful strokes, her head tilting slightly to one side the way it does when she's concentrating hard. She looked more at peace than I had seen her look in years. I pulled the door closed as quietly as I had opened it, and I went back to bed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I lay there in the dark thinking about everything I had just seen, and the more I thought about it the more pieces started falling into place. Early in our relationship, before we were married, she had mentioned once that she used to paint. Just mentioned it casually, the way you mention something you've put away, not with sadness exactly, more with the quiet acceptance of someone who has decided that a certain version of themselves belongs to the past. I had asked her about it once and she said she hadn't painted in years, that life had gotten busy, that it was just something she used to do. And I had accepted that answer because she offered it so easily. But sometimes people say, I used to, when what they really mean is, I didn't think there was room anymore. She had made room. At 3 a.m, in our spare room, on the floor, she had made room for the part of herself that the rest of her life had quietly crowded out. I thought about all the mornings she had gotten up before me to start the day. All the weekends she had organized and planned and held together. All the time she had put something of her own aside to make space for everything else. And I thought about her in that room, alone, in the middle of the night, painting landscapes that nobody had ever seen. And something in my chest pulled so tight it was almost painful. The next morning I waited until she left for work. And then I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and I started looking. It took me most of the day. I made phone calls, I asked questions, I drove across town to look at spaces that were wrong and then a space that was almost right and then one that was exactly right. A small studio on the second floor of a building near the park, with big windows that faced north the way artists always want them to face, and good light all day, and walls that were clean and white and waiting. I signed the papers that afternoon. I picked up the keys on my way home. I didn't say anything at dinner. We talked about ordinary things, her day, my day, something funny that had happened to a colleague of hers, what we were going to do that weekend. She was relaxed and warm and completely unaware. And I sat across from her and thought about how little we sometimes know about the people we love most, and how that isn't always a failure. Sometimes it's just a reminder that the person sitting across from you is still full of things worth discovering. The next morning, before she was fully awake, I put the keys on the nightstand next to her side of the bed. She saw them when she reached for her phone. She picked them up and looked at them for a moment, confused, turning them over in her hand. She said, "What are these?" I sat up and told her everything. I told her about the night I followed her down the hall, about standing in the doorway, about the canvases against the walls and the lamp on the floor and her face in that circle of light. I told her I had stood there watching her paint and that it was one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen in my life. I told her I was sorry it had taken me this long to notice, and sorry that she had felt like the middle of the night was the only time that belonged to her. I told her that I had found a studio, that the light was good, that it had her name on it now, and that I never wanted her to paint in secret again. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just sat there holding the keys with both hands, and I watched her face move through something I didn't have words for, surprise first, and then something softer and deeper that comes when someone sees you in a way you didn't know you needed to be seen. And then she looked up at me, and her eyes were full of tears, and she said, "How did you know this was the thing I needed most?" I reached over and took her hand, and I said, "Because you are the thing I pay most attention to in this world. And I should have been paying closer attention a long time ago." She leaned her head against my shoulder and didn't say anything else. And we sat like that together in the quiet of the morning, with the keys still in her hand, until the sun came fully through the window and the day began.